This lecture takes a look at another movement that came out of Cubism and one that really had a much more direct effect on graphic design. So the Cubism that Picasso and Braque produced, that happened before the Great War. After the Great War, we see artists returning to some of those strategies, but for a very different reason. So after the war, many people thought of it as being like a great test, a sacrifice that would lead to a more secure and harmonious continent. And so artists and politicians and people all over Europe are trying to think about how can we make sure that never happens again, and how can we create a world that is more universal and harmonious, less nationalist. The movement called Purism is a response to that. So Purism is what we'd call a Neoplatonic reductive geometric abstraction. I know, that's a lot of terms. Neoplatonic philosophy is this idea that there's this unchanging and eternal reality that's masked by the constant flux of the world as perceived by the senses. So basically, this philosophy is that there's a universal constant that always exists. That would be really appealing after the war, right? To say, oh, we all really agree on the same thing. We can all get along. So people within the purist movement are thinking about what are some images that would be universal? How can we say that, what type of images can we produce that will be universally understood? And so that's where purism comes in with this geometric abstraction. I mean, that sounds familiar, right? We were talking about that at the end of the 19th and early 20th century. But after the war, this is really embraced as a universal style that isn't dependent upon language. Anybody could understand geometry, regardless of whether you spoke French or German. The major artists involved in it are Amédée aux Enfants and Charles-Édouard Jeanneret, who's better known as Le Corbusier. The other thing that's happening at this time is a new emphasis on machine technology. We're going to call this the machine aesthetic. So the machine aesthetic is a type of art that really emphasizes the smooth, polished shapes of machines, as well as this admiration for industrial society. So that's new, right? If we think back to William Morris, he was all like, industry is bad. In the 20th century, you have artists embracing industry to say, no, this isn't good, and we shouldn't shy away from machines. We should embrace them and think about how we can introduce their qualities into our artwork. So part of the machine aesthetic is actually a return to classicism. So by classical art, we talk about ancient Greece and Rome. So on this slide, on the right, I have a photograph by Louis Hine of an American man working in a factory. And this photograph is really famous because in some ways, the worker, he sort of becomes part of the machine, right? Like he is embedded within this cog. His arms imitate the shape of it. He becomes one with the machine. And so we see this rhyming of machine and human. However, the pose that he's in is actually very similar to classical Greek sculpture. So in the lower corner down here, I have this sculpture of the discus thrower. And so you can see that Hine has posed his model here in this active position that really imitates Greek sculpture. And so as weird as it is, there's this desire to say the machine aesthetic is like a new classicism. It's universal. Everybody can appreciate it. So let's look at how that appears within painting. So this is a painting called Guitar and Bottles. It's from 1920 by Aux Enfants. This is purist because of the way that it's produced only with geometric forms. So as you look at this, what should stand out to you, probably what I always notice first, is this circle at the top of the glass, the circle down here, the circle of the bottle, all of these like rectangles, the trapezoids, all of these geometric forms that he puts together in order to produce his guitar and bottles. There's also this machine aesthetic to it as well because it's so smooth. Nothing's jagged and rough. It's these very polished, smooth textures. Now, when we put it next to Picasso's Bottle of Suze, you can see that it's drawing on some of the same ideas. I mean, the subject matter is almost exactly the same. It's bottles on a table, there's a guitar. Picasso did lots of guitars also. However, where the Picasso kind of deliberately disrupts vision, this painting by Aux Enfants, everything is much more smooth and polished. It has that same reductive geometry that Picasso was interested in, but it's not quite as disruptive. So the major graphic design movement that comes out of this is what we call Art Deco. The term comes from a 1925 exhibition in Paris called the Exposition Internationale of Decorative Arts and Modern Industry. I'm not going to say that in French because my French is awful. It's a catch-all phrase, Art Deco is, for the work of different types of designers pursuing geometric abstraction. But the important thing here is that if you recall, in the early 20th century, geometric abstraction wasn't necessarily mainstream. Here, it's becoming mainstream. It's becoming this trendy, fashionable thing that can be marketed to a broad public. So what we're looking at here is the Pavilion of the New Spirit. This is at that Art Deco exposition in 1925, and it's an apartment designed by Le Corbusier. And this is really the height of Art Deco. So look at the furniture that he designs. It's all on geometric forms, right? These boxes. And what he's doing that's really interesting here is he's actually dividing the space. So the furniture here, it's not just furniture, it's like a room divider. And so rather than having to build an apartment that had lots of different walls, you can use the furniture to make it more modular. You see that over here with this furniture as well. So most of what we see in here is very geometric and boxy. This painting is a purist painting, and it even has a classical looking column at the very center. So that's a gesture towards that classicism that I described before. Within graphic design, Art Deco translates into these really, I find, very engaging posters that combine the reductive geometry of Cubism with the polished and smooth aesthetic of the machine aesthetic. So this is a poster by A.M. Cassandra. That's a nom de plume. His real name is Adolphe Jean-Marie Moron. He's a founding member of a trade group called the Union of Modern Artists. They want to advance modernist style as a unified design language appropriate for the modern world. So again, this like Neoplatonic philosophy that says we can create a universal language that everyone will appreciate. He writes an essay in 1926 that says meaning should be communicated through images alone. You shouldn't need text. And again, that's so anti-nationalist, right? That it shouldn't matter whether you're French or German or English. You should be able to understand this poster without any words. And so this poster is a great example of that. So this is a poster for the dining car on a train. And you can see he has in the background, this is a photograph of a train on the track, or like the wheel. And then he superimposes over it a carbonated fizzy spray thing to carbonate your beverage, wine, bread. A lot of what he's doing here is deeply inspired by Purism and Cubism, though. So if we put it next to the Picasso, you'll see that Cassandra is playing with negative space in the same way that the Picasso does. So when we looked at this collage, we talked about how right here, the bottom of the bottle of Suze is not actually there. It's just this empty space that he cut away from this piece of paper. Over here, the top of the carbonator thing is empty, like it's literally negative space here, and yet our eyes read it as being like the top of this carbonation bottle. Similarly, the glass works. So there is no exterior to the glass. We read it that way because of the angle at which these stirrers hang. Same thing with the wine glass stem and whatever this plate that the bread is resting upon. All of that is negative space. And so it functions in a very similar way. If we compare it with the Aux Enfants, you can see that it uses that same geometric reductive abstraction. So these forms here are cylinders, squares. I love that he integrates the photograph in the background, but that's the only time that you see anything that is explicitly naturalistic. Everything else reads like these smooth, polished designs, very similar to the Aux Enfants. It should evoke an element of Zachplakat for you as well. And I think what's interesting here is I feel like Cassandra takes the best of Zachplakat, this isolation on an individual object that really draws in the viewer's attention and communicates. And it works well here because what he's trying to sell is, you know, get a glass of wine when you're on the train, as opposed to on the left when Eric is trying to encourage Germans to contribute to war bonds. I mean, the one on the left, you know I love that poster, but it's just not, it is a more sophisticated and complicated message than what the Allies were producing at the same time. This is probably Cassandra's most famous poster. It's an ad for wine, and it's this poster in which you're supposed to move from left to right. The wine is called Dubonnet, and it's a pun. So Dubo means good. So the man has filled his glass with wine and he's looking at it. Dubon means better. And then Dubonnet is the name of the wine. So it's really clever in terms of its copy, but it's also brilliant in terms of the design, because even if you don't get the pun, you still understand what's happening here. So this man is seated at the table, he's having a drink, and it's in holding that drink that he starts to feel like himself again. He starts as this just like outline of a figure. And then as he drinks the wine, it slowly restores him to himself. So it's this really just fantastic image that communicates without words, which is exactly what he was talking about back in 1926 when he penned that essay. Cassandra writes this essay about how images should function without text. So what we're looking at here is typography that Cassandra designed. And in doing this, he applies that same reductive geometry to letter forms. So as you look across this bifur typography, you can see that he's taken the major geometric forms of each letter and reduced it only to that. So for the letter A, he focuses on the upward V of the A, and then he uses the negative space in here to suggest the rest of it. There are letters that I think are highly successful. Like I think that the M is pretty cool. I like the P. Other ones like the C, I don't quite know. That doesn't quite read correctly to me. The S is a little weird. The numbers I think are bizarre. Like what is even the 7? Like if you saw that, would you think 7? I don't know that you would. Also the 2. But the point is he's experimenting with it, right? He's trying to find the limits of that geometric reductive abstraction such that it will continue to communicate. A more effective typeface is the Pignot typeface that he creates in 1937. This has that same reductive geometry, very, you know, it's sans serif, but very spare lines. The I is just a single line here, the L similar. But it's far more communicative. And this should feel, when you think of Art Deco, it's this type of typography that you often, or at least for me, that it evokes this type of very classical typography. Anyway, that's it for our Art Deco, and I'm looking forward to seeing your work this week.